Lucia, at 28, often felt like an outsider in her own family, overshadowed by her younger sister, Amira. While Amira attended a prestigious university, Lucia only finished high school and worked as a web designer. Growing up in a small, rural town, Lucia had always sensed a difference in how their parents treated them, even though they never voiced it directly. Amira, the golden child, seemed to always get more attention. She received expensive gifts, while Lucia's birthdays, often too close to Christmas, were overshadowed by the holiday celebrations. She usually received just one gift, and it was often practical, like clothes or books. Their parents never missed Amira's soccer games, but Lucia couldn't recall them ever showing up to her tennis matches, not even her last one in middle school. This made her feel forgotten and unimportant. Even though Amira was often the cause of her frustration, there were moments when she would defend Lucia, pointing out her strengths and achievements, even when their parents barely acknowledged them. Still, the lack of support from their parents took its toll. By the time Lucia finished high school, their grandparents, who had always been a support system for her, passed away. Their loss only deepened the emotional gap within the family. As Amira flourished in both academics and sports, fully supported by their parents, Lucia felt more isolated than ever. The financial strain their family faced after their grandparents' passing only made the situation worse. Home became an increasingly stressful place for both sisters, especially for Lucia, who longed for acknowledgement and equality. Despite her dreams of attending university to study design, Lucia didn't pursue higher education right away. Instead, she started working as a web designer for a company that specialized in creating websites for women's services, like hair salons and nail parlors. Though the job was far from home, it gave her an important stepping stone into the design world, a field she had always been passionate about. Every opportunity to learn, from assisting the experienced designers in the company to tackling new projects, only fueled her desire to improve. Over time, her hard work began to pay off. She grew from an eager learner into a respected member of the design team. Her colleagues started to share valuable resources and connections with her, which played a key role in her professional growth. 5 years into her career, she was given major projects, earning recognition in her field. Then, 7 years after entering the workforce, Lucia learned that Amira was preparing for her university entrance exams, aiming for a prestigious medical school. Lucia, who had always admired Amira's drive, wanted to support her in this new chapter. When Amira was accepted into her first-choice medical school, Lucia was overjoyed for her and immediately congratulated her. However, Amira shared a concern. The medical school required a mandatory donation. This was a financial burden that their parents couldn't handle, so they had Amira approach Lucia for help. Despite the awkwardness of this indirect request, Lucia, who had seen how hard Amira worked, agreed to pay the donation and other entrance fees, even though their family's finances were already tight. Once Amira moved into her university apartment, just a short distance from Lucia, they tried to maintain their relationship. However, their conversations became more infrequent and less personal. Amira would message Lucia with brief requests like, "I want to eat this," or "Can you buy me this?" And Lucia, wanting to help, would do so. Despite occasional meals together, there was a growing distance between them, as Amira seemed more focused on her new life at university, often preoccupied with her phone rather than engaging with Lucia. One evening, Lucia tried to ease the tension by talking about their parents, hoping to connect with Amira. But Amira responded harshly, dismissing Lucia's career as a web designer. "Of course, a medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't require qualifications like yours," she said, making Lucia feel unappreciated and worthless. Her sister's words stung deeply, especially since Lucia knew how much skill and creativity her work involved, even if it didn't come with the formal qualifications that Amira had. It was a harsh reminder of the expectations their parents had always placed on them. Amira was the smart one, and Lucia was the disappointment. Things only worsened as Amira's attitude grew more condescending. She openly said, "Lucia, it's tough for someone without a degree. Dad and Mom keep saying I'm destined for great things, but they think you're a disappointment. They told me to make sure you don't slip further. A future doctor should look out for her sister." Lucia felt suffocated by the weight of these comparisons, which reminded her of all the labels her parents had given her over the years. As Amira moved out and became more involved in her university life, she seemed to change, surrounded by classmates who praised her, and constantly told by their parents that she was destined for greatness. Amira began to distance herself from Lucia. The admiration from their parents seemed to confirm her belief that she was superior, and she started to adopt their dismissive attitude toward her sister. By the time the holidays arrived, Lucia had become used to the emotional distance between them. The family tradition of gathering for the holidays only highlighted how much Amira had changed. The house was filled with relatives, neighbors, and Amira's classmates, all celebrating her achievements. She boasted about her life at university, while Lucia remained in the background, barely noticed. When Amira spoke, she reveled in the admiration, telling everyone, "Mom keeps asking me to visit more often." The celebration made it painfully clear how different their lives had become. Amira was the star of the family, basking in the attention and praise, while Lucia quietly observed, feeling like a shadow in her own home. During the evening, as Lucia tried to break the tension by offering wine, an elderly neighbor attempted to redirect the conversation toward Lucia's career in design, but Amira, along with their parents, quickly dismissed it. She didn't even go to college, they said, making Lucia feel like she didn't belong. The comment stung, as many people in the room had chosen similar paths to hers, focusing on work experience and family rather than formal education. The contrast between the two sisters' lives was now undeniable. Lucia had found her own path, slowly building a successful career, while Amira was entrenched in a world of academic excellence and the constant praise of their parents. Despite the harshness and challenges, Lucia continued to navigate life with resilience, carving out a space where she could be proud of who she was, even if her family didn't see it. As the year drew to a close, Lucia's focus shifted to her own future. She had worked hard to carve out a career for herself, and she now had the chance to further her education in design. Amira's medical journey and their family's expectations may have shaped Lucia's life in many ways, but she was no longer willing to let them define her. She was determined to follow her own path, regardless of how it was viewed by those who had always favored her younger sister. The journey to find self-worth and independence had only just begun. At 28, I had always felt like an outsider in my own family, overshadowed by my younger sister, Amira. She was everything our parents hoped for: bright, successful, and on track to attend a prestigious university. In comparison, I had finished high school but never went to college, settling for a job as a web designer. Growing up in a small town, it was easy to see the difference in how our parents treated us. Amira always had their undivided attention. She got expensive gifts, their constant support at her soccer games, and praise for every achievement. Meanwhile, my birthdays, which were so close to Christmas, were often just an afterthought. I'd get one gift, usually practical, and our parents rarely attended any of my events. The last time they came to one of my tennis matches was in middle school. Despite the lack of support, Amira always stood by me. She would defend me when our parents made unfair comparisons between us, always trying to highlight my strengths. But it wasn't enough. When our grandparents, the only ones who truly understood what was going on, passed away, it deepened the divide in our family. With no one else to back me up, I started feeling more and more like an outsider. As time went on, Amira, who had always been my rock, started to withdraw. Our mother criticized her for supporting me, and eventually, she stopped speaking up. Even though Amira excelled in school and sports, and our parents gave her all the attention and resources she needed, I became more isolated. To make matters worse, when our grandparents died, we discovered that our family was struggling financially. This only added to the strain. Despite everything, I longed for recognition, for some kind of equality between us, but it seemed like no matter what I did, my achievements were always overlooked. After high school, I couldn't afford college, so I began working right away. I found a job as a web designer at a small company that focused on creating websites for businesses that catered to women, like nail and hair salons. It wasn't close to home, but it was a start. I threw myself into the work, learning everything I could, even though the journey was tough. Slowly, my skills improved, and I began to gain the respect of my colleagues. Over the years, my role in the company grew, and I started working on more important projects. By the time I'd been working for 5 years, I was a full-fledged web designer, known for my creativity and dedication. Then, out of nowhere, Amira got into medical school. She had worked incredibly hard, and I was so proud of her, but the excitement was short-lived when she told me about the required donation for her private medical school. Our parents were worried about how it would look if they couldn't help, so they asked Amira to approach me for the money. This felt like a slap in the face, especially after how they had treated me over the years. Still, I decided to help. I covered the initial fees and donation. After all, She was my sister, and I wanted to see her succeed. Amira moved into an apartment near her school, and I thought maybe things would improve. I hoped she would reach out to me when she needed support, but the more she immersed herself in her new life, the more distant she became. When we did talk, she would ask for small things, like money for food or clothes, but the conversations were always short and impersonal. It felt like she was more interested in her phone than in me. It hurt, but I tried to ignore it, thinking she was just busy with school. Then one evening, I tried to bring up how our parents really did care about her. I was trying to keep the conversation light, but Amira snapped at me. She said something that cut me deep. Of course, a medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't require qualifications like yours. Her words stung like a slap. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel inferior, but this time it was different. She belittled my career, as though it was meaningless because it didn't require a degree. The anger boiled inside me, but I kept quiet. There was no point in arguing. Later, during a family gathering, Amira made a comment that made everything worse. She said, "Dad and Mom always tell me that I'm destined for greatness, but they think you're a disappointment. They told me to make sure you don't slip further. A future doctor should look out for her sister." Those words cut to the bone. It was like all the years of feeling second-rate, of being told I wasn't good enough, had suddenly come rushing back. I felt suffocated by the weight of their expectations and judgments, and when Amira left, as if nothing had happened, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I told everyone that I wasn't coming back next year. I had had enough of the comparisons, the hurtful comments, and the lack of support. As I packed my things and headed for the station, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't care that Amira and my parents waved goodbye. I wasn't going to let them continue to weigh me down. Going home had always felt like a burden, but now I was determined to move forward, to break free from this toxic environment. At first, when I started working as a web designer, I could use my job as an excuse to keep some distance from my family, but as my career advanced, it became harder to avoid them. Despite everything, I began to realize that my parents had done their best to raise us, in their own flawed way. Amira, still so young and focused on her studies, didn't seem to understand the challenges I faced in the real world. She had all the support she needed, while I had to make my way on my own, fighting for every step. As time passed, my anger and disappointment grew. I realized that, if I wanted to maintain my self-respect, I couldn't continue this relationship with my parents. I had to cut ties, for my own peace of mind. So, I made the difficult decision to stop contacting them. Months later, Amira called me out of the blue. She asked if I had paid her tuition, and when I told her that I had only covered the initial costs, she seemed surprised. She admitted that our parents had sent her to a private university without considering the long-term costs. Now, with the tuition bills piling up, they had asked her to come to me for help. It felt like a slap in the face after everything that had happened. I reminded Amira that I had already given her a significant amount of money, but she kept insisting that I help her again. She said she was struggling with her social circle's expenses, and that our parents couldn't afford to pay the tuition anymore. Her plea was filled with urgency, but there was no apology or recognition of how badly they had treated me. Despite my better judgment, I considered helping her again, but as the conversation continued, I realized that my parents had taken the money I gave Amira and used it for their own needs instead of supporting her education. This revelation made me even more resolute in my decision to stop helping her. A few days later, my parents called, demanding that I pay for Amira's tuition. They sounded angry, as if it was my duty to support them financially. It was clear that they cared more about my money than about me as a person. I had had enough. I blocked their numbers and made it clear that I would no longer be part of this toxic cycle. Over the next few months, Amira struggled. She was forced to take on part-time work to make ends meet, but balancing work and school was too much. She eventually dropped out of medical school. My parents, facing financial ruin, tried to reach out to me for help, but I had made my decision. I had stopped sending money home, and I wasn't going back. Eventually, I heard from a relative that Amira had returned home and was living a reclusive life. She spent her days playing video games and isolating herself from everyone. My parents, once so full of hope and pride for Amira, were now struggling with their own issues. My father had even gotten into trouble at work, which led to his resignation. My mother, unable to find steady work, had disappeared, leaving no trace. It was clear that the consequences of their actions were catching up to them. Meanwhile, I had moved on. I had built a successful career as a designer, and now I was preparing for the next step, taking the university entrance exam. I had saved enough money to pursue my dream of higher education and possibly even start my own business one day. The contrast between my life and my family's was stark. I had moved forward, while they seemed stuck in the past, weighed down by their own choices. It had been a long, difficult journey, but I had finally found peace. My career was thriving, and I was excited about the future, no longer bound by the past. I was ready to embrace whatever came next.